Margarette Hawthorne had not planned to stay long. She told herself it would be a quick visit, just enough time to lay fresh flowers at her parents' headstones and whisper the prayers she had rehearsed all the way from town. But the moment she stepped through the rusted iron gate of the old family graveyard, time seemed to loosen its grip. The cemetery sat on a gentle hill outside of Red Willow Creek, surrounded by tall prairie grass and weathered cottonwoods. Some headstones leaned at tired angles, their names softened by decades of wind and rain. Others bore no names, at all lonely smooth stones or wooden markers, long bleached by the sun. It was those unmarked graves that drew her attention. A man knelt there. He wore a dust-worn hat, pulled low, a dark coat hanging from broad shoulders. His horse was tied respectfully to a fence post, head lowered as if it too understood the place. The man carefully set wildflowers, blue lupin and yellow primrose at the base of one unmarked grave, adjusting them with a tenderness Margarette did not expect from a cowboy. She paused, unsure whether to announce herself. He moved from grave to grave, placing flowers at each one. He bowed his head briefly every time, lips moving in words she couldn't hear. It wasn't hurried, it wasn't showy. It felt private. Margarette had visited this graveyard since she was a child. She knew nearly every stone, and yet she had never seen this man before. She waited until he stood and brushed dirt from his gloves. "Excuse me," she said softly. He turned, clearly startled, then tipped his hat in apology. His eyes were a calm, brown, weathered, but kind. "Didn't mean to disturb you," he said. "I'll be on my way." "You weren't disturbing anything," Margarette replied. I've never seen anyone tend those graves before." His gaze flicked back to the unmarked stones. "Most folks don't notice them." "I do," she said. "I just didn't know who belonged to them." "Not many do," he hesitated, then added, "Name's Travis, Margarette." They stood in silence, the wind threading through the grass. "Are they family?" she asked. "Not by blood," Travis said. "But they mattered." Margarette felt a quiet ache stir in her chest. "That's kind of you." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the word. Someone should remember. She watched him mount his horse and ride away, the flowers bright against the muted earth behind him. Margarette knelt at her parents' graves, but her thoughts lingered on the stranger, the Grave Marker Cowboy, and the quiet sorrow he carried with him. Margarette returned the following week. She told herself it was coincidence, that grief had its own schedule. But she brought extra flowers this time, more than she needed for her parents' graves. Travis was already there. He stood beneath a cottonwood tree, hat in hand, staring at the same unmarked graves. When he saw her, recognition softened his expression. Afternoon, Miss Margarette. Travis lowered himself onto one knee nearby. They're railroad men, migrant workers. A few drifters died when the line was being built. No family to claim them. Margarette swallowed. "And you knew them?" "My father did," Travis said. "He helped bury them when the company moved on and pretended they never existed." "So you come here for him." "For them," he corrected gently. "And for my father, he believed no one should be forgotten just because they were poor or passing through." Margarette felt tears prick her eyes. "My parents are buried here. They raised me to believe the same thing." Silence settled comfortably between them. From that day on, they came together, week after week, season after season. Sometimes they spoke of the dead, other times of the living the roads Travis had traveled, the loneliness Margarette carried since losing her family. Their grief braided together, becoming something shared instead of solitary. The graveyard no longer felt quite so heavy. Spring arrived with rain and wildflowers. Margarette noticed how Travis smiled more often now, though sadness still lived quietly behind his eyes. She noticed how he always waited for her before leaving, how he walked her to the gate. One afternoon, she asked the question that had lingered too long. "Who do you visit when I'm not here?" Travis hesitated. "My wife." Margarette's heart tightened. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "She's buried in another town," he said. "But the grief followed me. These graves. They helped me learn how to carry it." Margarette nodded. "I lost the man I planned to marry. Fever took him before we could set a date." They looked at each other, recognizing the same wound. "I never thought healing would come from a graveyard," Margarette said softly. "Neither did I," Travis replied. The wind stirred the flowers at their feet, as if the past itself listened. By summer, the graveyard changed. New markers appeared, simple wooden ones Travis carved himself. Names, dates, small acknowledgments of lives once overlooked. Margarette helped him paint them. "You're giving them voices," she said. "We're giving them witnesses," Travis corrected. Their laughter began to mingle with their sorrow. They brought lunches, shared stories, and slowly allowed hope to step where grief once stood alone. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Travis reached for Margarette's hand. "I don't know what the future looks like," he said, "but I know I don't want to walk it alone." Margarette squeezed his fingers. "Neither do I." Margarette Hawthorne arrived at the old graveyard just after dawn, when the morning mist still clung to the grass like a soft veil. The iron gate groaned as she pushed it open, the sound echoing faintly across the hill. She paused there, as she always did, steadying herself before stepping inside. Visiting the dead required a certain kind of courage, one she never quite mastered, no matter how many years had passed. The graveyard belonged to her family once, back when Red Willow Creek was little more than a trading post and a promise. Her parents rested near the center, beneath sturdy stone markers, their names carved deep and clear. Other graves told quieter stories, tilted headstones, faded dates, and some with no names at all. Those were the ones that always unsettled her most. She walked slowly, basket of fresh flowers tucked against her arm, boots damp with morning dew. The air smelled of earth and wild sage. Birds stirred in the cottonwood trees. But otherwise the place was still until she noticed movement near the far fence line. A man knelt among the unmarked graves. Margarette stopped short, her breath catching. He wasn't one of the townsfolk. She knew nearly everyone who ever came here, which wasn't many. This man wore a weathered brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat, pulled low, his posture relaxed but respectful. Beside him lay a bundle of wildflowers, bright splashes of color against the muted soil. She watched as he carefully placed the flowers at the base of one grave, straightening them as if the person beneath might care how they looked. Then he bowed his head, lingering in silence before moving to the next. He did this again and again. Margarette had walked past these graves her entire life. She had wondered about them, felt sorrow for them, but she had never seen anyone tend them before. Whoever this man was, he carried a familiarity with the place that intrigued her. She cleared her throat softly, unsure whether to interrupt. The man looked up, surprise flickering across his face before settling into calm. He rose slowly and tipped his hat. "Didn't hear you come in," he said, voice low and steady. "Hope I wasn't intruding." "Not at all," Margarette replied. I've never seen anyone bring flowers here." He glanced back at the unmarked graves. "Most folks don't." "That doesn't mean they don't matter," she said, before she could stop herself. A faint smile touched his mouth. "No, ma'am, it doesn't." There was something gentle about him, something worn but sincere. His eyes held the kind of sadness that didn't ask for pity, only understanding. "I'm Margarette," she said. "Travis," he answered. "Travis Cole." They stood there, awkwardly, the quiet stretching between them not uncomfortable, just unhurried. "Are they family?" she asked. "Not by blood," Travis said, "but they were someone's sons, someone's brothers, men who came west chasing work and never made it home." Margarette felt a familiar ache bloom in her chest. "Thank you for remembering them." He nodded, as if the words mattered more than he'd expected. Someone should. After a moment, he picked up the empty bundle and stepped toward his horse. Before leaving, he looked back once more at the graves, then at Margarette. "I come every week," he said simply. "So do I," she replied. As Travis rode away, Margarette knelt beside her parents' graves. But her thoughts lingered elsewhere, on the cowboy who placed flowers where no names remained, and the quiet promise his presence carried. Margarette returned the following Sunday with no intention of staying long, yet her steps slowed the moment she reached the iron gate. She told herself she was lingering because the morning was peaceful, because the sky stretched wide and blue above the hill. But in truth, she was listening for the sound of hooves, for the quiet presence she had felt all week. Travis was already there. He stood near the far corner of the graveyard, hat off, hair darkened by sweat as he worked with a small wooden marker. A hammer rested in the grass beside him, along with a stack of neatly carved boards. He knelt, pressing the marker firmly into the soil, checking its angle before tapping it down with careful precision. Margarette watched silently, struck by the reverence in his movements. This wasn't a task done out of duty. It was an act of devotion. She approached slowly. "Good morning." Travis looked up and smiled, as if he had hoped she'd come. "Morning, Margarette." She gestured toward the marker. "You're giving them names." "Where I can," he said. "Some I only know by first name. Some by how they laughed, others only by the way they died." Margarette knelt beside him, brushing dirt from her skirt. "How did you learn all this?" "My father," Travis said. "He worked the railroad crews, kept track of men when the company wouldn't, said every life deserved to be remembered by more than a paycheck." He paused, pressing the earth down around the marker. "When he passed, I found his old notebook. Names, places, stories." Margarette swallowed. "So you come here for him?" "For him," Travis agreed. "And for them, feels like finishing something he started." She handed him a bundle of flowers without thinking. He accepted them with a nod and placed them gently at the marker's base. They sat together for a while, the wind stirring softly around them. "I used to think grief was loud," Margarette said, "like a storm that never ends. But this," she gestured around them, "this is quieter, heavier." Travis nodded. "Grief doesn't leave. It just changes shape." She studied him then, really looked at him, the lines near his eyes, the steadiness in his hands. "Who do you grieve most?" He hesitated, jaw tightening briefly. "My wife." Margarette's heart ached at the word. "I'm sorry." Margarette felt the weight of her own loss rise to meet his. "I lost the man I was meant to marry. He's buried 2 rows over." Their eyes met, a shared understanding passing between them. Neither spoke for a long moment. Eventually, Travis stood and dusted off his knees. "I usually stay a while longer. You're welcome to join me." "I'd like that," Margarette said. Together, they walked the rows, reading names aloud where they could, standing silently where they couldn't. The graveyard no longer felt empty. It felt witnessed. As the sun climbed higher, Margarette realized something had shifted. Not the pain, but the loneliness of it. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying it alone. Summer arrived gently, as if the land itself had learned patience from the graveyard. Wildflowers spread across the hill in quiet defiance of loss, their colors bright against the pale stones. Margarette found herself smiling more often now when she walked through the iron gate, no longer bracing for sorrow, but expecting companionship. Travis was there, as he had been every Sunday since spring began. They had fallen into an unspoken rhythm. He brought carved markers and tools. She brought flowers and fresh bread wrapped in cloth. They worked side by side, rarely needing words. Yet when they spoke, it was with the ease of people who trusted silence. On this particular morning, Travis was carving letters into a wooden plank, his knife steady, deliberate. Margarette watched from nearby, fascinated by the care he took with each stroke. "You carve like the name matters," she said. "It does," Travis replied. "It's all some folks have left." She nodded and placed a flower at the base of a newly marked grave. "Do you ever wonder if they can hear us?" He considered the question seriously. "I think, even if they can't, we can. And sometimes that's enough." They continued their work until the sun climbed high. When they finally sat beneath the cottonwood tree, Margarette broke the comfortable quiet. "Why did you choose this place?" she asked. "You could have moved on like so many others." Travis leaned back against the trunk. "I tried. Rode north after my wife passed. Thought distance would loosen the ache. But grief travels light. Caught up to me every time." He glanced at the graves. "Here at least it feels like it's doing something useful." Margarette swallowed. "I stayed because this is where my parents are. Because leaving felt like forgetting." "Funny thing," Travis said. "Staying doesn't mean you're stuck." She looked at him, surprised by the quiet certainty in his voice. "I think these men taught me that," he continued. "Most of them were moving forward when they died. Doesn't make their lives small." Margarette felt warmth settle in her chest. "You speak like someone who's learning to live again." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves overhead. Margarette shivered slightly, and without hesitation, Travis removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Thank you," she said softly. He didn't pull away immediately. Their hands brushed, lingering just long enough for something unspoken to bloom between them. Later, as they walked the rows together, Margarette noticed something new, more markers than before. More flowers than she had brought. "You've been busy," she said. "I come some days, when you're not here," Travis admitted. "Didn't want to say, in case it sounded possessive." She smiled. "It doesn't." They stopped, before one grave in particular, simple, marked only with a name and a year. "That's him," Margarette said quietly. "The man I loved." Travis removed his hat. "Would you like me to say something?" She nodded. He spoke gently, respectfully, thanking the man for loving Margarette well, for leaving her with memories worth carrying. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they weren't heavy anymore. As they walked back toward the gate, Margarette realized something had changed. The dead were no longer silent. Through shared stories and shared grief, they were speaking again through remembrance. Through healing, through a bond, growing stronger with every step. The heat of late summer settled over Red Willow Creek, heavy but not unbearable. The graveyard changed with the season grass tall and golden, insects humming softly among the stones. Margarette noticed that she no longer felt the weight in her chest when she walked the path between the graves. The sorrow was still there, but it had softened, like a scar that no longer ached with every breath. Travis noticed it too. "You're smiling more," he said, one afternoon, as they worked together near the fence line. "I think I finally remembered how." Margarette replied. They laughed, an easy sound that surprised them both. By now, the unmarked graves were fewer. Simple wooden markers stood where blank earth once lay. Names, dates, quiet acknowledgments that these lives had mattered. Margarette helped paint them, her hands smudged with white and brown, her skirts streaked with dust. "You know," she said, brushing hair from her face, "this place doesn't feel so lonely anymore." "That's because it isn't," Travis said. "Not now." He had begun bringing more than tools: extra food, water, sometimes a blanket when the evenings cooled. He waited for her at the gate when she arrived, and she waited for him when he stayed late, finishing a marker. Their companionship had grown steady, comforting, and quietly essential. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the hill, Travis grew unusually quiet. Margarette sensed it and set her brush aside. "What's weighing on you?" she asked. He stared out across the graves. "I've been afraid to say something." She turned to face him fully. "You can tell me." "I don't want to dishonor my wife's memory," Travis said slowly. "She was my heart for a long time, but carrying her grief alone nearly broke me." Margarette reached for his hand without thinking. "Honoring love doesn't mean refusing new life. He looked at her then, really looked at her, eyes searching. I didn't expect to find this, he admitted. You, us. Neither did I, Margarette said. But I'm glad we did. The wind stirred around them, lifting the edge of her skirt, rustling the flowers they had placed earlier that day. Travis squeezed her hand, grounding, present. I don't want to rush anything, he said. We aren't, she replied gently. We're healing. They walked the rows one last time, before leaving, reading names aloud, touching markers lightly. When they reached the gate, Travis stopped. There's one grave left, he said. One I haven't been able to mark. Margarette followed his gaze to a small patch of earth beneath the cottonwood tree. No stone, no marker, just grass. Why? She asked. It's for the man my father was before life. Wore him down, Travis said. He never thought he deserved remembrance. Margarette knelt, placing flowers there anyway. He does. Travis's breath hitched, and he looked away, but not before she saw the moisture in his eyes. As they left the graveyard together, Margarette realized something profound. The place that once held only endings had become a beginning, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that love, quiet, patient, and resilient, could grow even among the dead. Autumn arrived without ceremony, painting the hills of Red Willow Creek in shades of gold and rust. The graveyard stood quieter now, not from neglect, but from completion. Every grave bore a marker, some carved in wood, some etched in stone, each one a declaration that a life once lived would not fade unnoticed. Margarette walked the path slowly, her arm linked through Travis's. It felt natural now, as if their hands had always belonged together. Where grief had once kept them apart from the living world, remembrance had drawn them back into it. They stopped before the cottonwood tree, its leaves whispering softly overhead. This is the last one, Travis said. The marker rested against his leg, simple and unadorned. Margarette watched as he knelt and pressed it into the soil with care. He didn't rush. He didn't look away. What name did you choose? She asked. Fee stepped aside so she could read it. Thomas Cole, a good man, remembered. Tears welled in her eyes. He would have liked that. Travis nodded. He would have said it was more than he deserved. They stood in silence, the kind that no longer hurt. As they walked the rows together, one final time, Margarette noticed something she hadn't before. How the graveyard felt alive, not with noise, but with presence, with stories, with the steady assurance that love didn't end at the edge of a grave. I used to think this place was a reminder of everything I'd lost, Margarette said. Now it feels like proof that love stays. Travis smiled. Love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. They stopped at her parents' graves. Margarette knelt, smoothing the soil, then stood and took Travis's hand. I think they'd like you, she said. I hope so, he replied. I'd like to think they know I'll take good care of you. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. The wind carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant smoke from town. Life moving forward. Later, as they reached the gate, Travis hesitated. I've been offered work, farther west, he said. Nothing permanent yet. I won't go without asking you first. Margarette met his gaze, steady and sure. Wherever you go, I'll go. This place taught me something important.
What's that?
That healing doesn't mean leaving the past behind, she said. It means carrying it with you, without letting it weigh you down. Travis smiled, emotion thick in his voice. Then, I reckon, we'll carry it together. Hand in hand, they walked away from the hill, the graveyard behind them glowing softly in the late afternoon light, a place once defined by loss, now shaped by remembrance and love. And, though the dead remained, they were no longer forgotten. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.